So, one, I'll use the same tactic I used against T in round 4 of CDO. Like all forms of capitalism, impact investing is a socio-economic scam that ultimately is more harmful than good. The extension is very simple, coming from Deputy Prime Minister. Notice, impact investing is the best way for companies to hide their high-scale social scams in the guise of social clamor. What's the step-by-step process of this, and how do we flip this against the entirety of LO's case on contributing to the poor? 1. An impact investor funds a company wanting to provide social good with financial return. These two are the conditions necessary for the impact investor, as not only are you basing off of impact, but you're also an investor, which requires a return of investment, i.e. profit or financial return. This is what allows for the pressure to exist intergenerationally on the companies to guarantee the ROI. And because this is a trend, multiple companies now require consistent targeting of possible employees, communities, and even demand. This means now there is competition for creating environmental impact, effectively knocking disenfranchised corporations off of the environmental market through investor pressure. But it also means that these corporations will then resort to targeting low-income communities, i.e. farmers or rural workers or those who do not have access to financial securities and safety nets like banks at the very end of the day. This is the entire case of LO, and I'll tell you why this is harmful. Because the rationale of this is that these communities are untapped markets with high demand. A lot of people from these communities want jobs with low competition, since most competition is consistently centralized in urban areas, especially since this is under the guise of helping disenfranchised communities, which itself is considered a quote-unquote statistical impact. This has made rural communities a consistent target from companies under pressure invested by impact investors, meaning companies who would want ROI to pay back investors would restructure their impact model from free or public provision to privatize or paid operations, like microfinance loans on these people on the ground, or installment payments, or even monetizing their basic needs like education or healthcare, which is the flip to their entirety of hospital case, because now you have to pay for your healthcare through sponsorships of local schools and hospitals, which then shifts the burden of profit from the company onto the people at the very end of the day. The reason why then people are often trapped in this cycle is because these rural communities are often desperate and see something really cool, and they accept high interest and strict repayment terms just to feed themselves, and it's not for profit, which enables companies to price hike and do exploitative things like penalize late payments just to guarantee further ROI. This is very important because this pressure is now transitioned from companies towards the people on the ground. This implicates the community into debt cycles where people borrow again just to repay old loans or asset loss, which is repossession of belongings to pay as collateral for interest, which then means that all the money goes to investors and companies at the very end of the day. This all comes from the idea of impact investing still needed return of investment, which means that not only are investments on the shiny things and only in the shiny things, i.e. solar panels or fintech, which are scalable and profitable with low risk, because a lot of investors pull onto these technologies, but it means that these investments are imposed onto the masses, which means then they are punished if they do not adhere with this hidden exploitative scam, i.e. they get debt trapped. This is very important because this affirms Prime Minister's complacency argument, because these shiny things provide quote-unquote glamour that already absolves them of responsibility, because now you're doing cool things like investing on solar panels or you're investing on fintech, but it also means that you lose the incentive to solve real issues, i.e. healthcare betterment or disaster reliance. Why is this true? Because they're not shiny and low risk enough to invest. Why would you invest in healthcare when healthcare is such a high risk investment for an investor who wants to be able to guarantee ROI rather than shiny things that already guarantee immediate ROI? But 2, not solving these structural problems affirms their shiny band-aid solutions. So they need to keep their problems existing. They need to keep the problems of healthcare existing, so they affirm their shiny band-aid solutions, i.e. you don't have proper infrastructure, but solar panels are now the future without any land left for the people. This is worse because government funding and social services are debilitated inside opposition the moment companies leave rural communities to the ground, which forces them to also use their social services to pay back to more marginalized communities, for these marginalized communities to also pay back towards companies, which also restructures that burden of profit to the government, which intuitively then goes to every citizen paying tax for investors and companies who are often tax-cutted by the trend. This is evident in the takeover of private equity funds and entities of the Department of Agriculture at expense of government control, which are not profit incentive and are more socially incentivized, which made the Department of Agriculture and the farmers under it dependent on ROI from companies to then pay back investors, depleting the salaries of local farmers, depleting the salaries of people who are on the ground, who necessitate the job, that these jobs are effectively being exploited. What's the conclusion then? Citizens are debt trapped by the biggest environmental scam. The burden of ROI is shifted down to the poorest of the poor, and the state and these impact investors run away scot-free because they are affirmed by their investor patterns making impacts, quote-unquote. And it is seen in companies where the statistics of selling solar panels are reported and nationalized worldwide, but not the economic problems existing from this investor pooling, which aggrandizes the impact and affirms the corporate scheme. How do we weigh this then, which is something that opposition doesn't fully prove? Simple. What did opposition say? Before I move on, POI. 3, 2, 1. They say 4 things. 1. Social benefit is not only dependent on states but on corporations as well. The problem is the trend does not diversify or democratize the existence of many different alternatives. The problem is the exploitative nature of corporations and their profit incentives, which number 1 kills the people it's supposed to protect by actively pushing the burden onto the people, but then number 2 actively pushing away government subsidies and government incentives because of the fact that these are not competitive, but because number 2 a lot of these people often bank onto these corporations or companies because of this huge ROI return. But then 3, it is the fact that the loss of these social revenues, because they're trying to pull back towards these, let's say for example, marginalized communities who have to pay back towards companies, means that even if you get the social benefits that come from side opposition, these things will just be used to pay back towards huge companies at the very end of the day. 2, direct capital to impactful mechanisms. Notice, this is tokenistic. These impactful mechanisms do not matter if they are not palatable to the people and actively harm the masses. You don't teach these people how to set up these solar panels at the very end of the day, or how to make proper solar panel grids. So now they have useless solar panels that don't give them anything. And even if they do, they can be provided and distributed anyway, better publicly, even better absent impact investor trends, giving more agency and leeway for companies to gradually expand without impact investors' ROI pressure. 3, making hospitals. This is the problem of tokenism. Making products but not understanding the implication of these products in society is the easiest statistical manipulation to affirm the economic scam. Lastly, sustainability. They say this. This at best case is only sustainable to the companies and to the investors. But even then, it's not sustainable because companies will then be locked to the idea of exploiting the masses just to pay back passive investors, which means that one wrong move, i.e. a league of exploitative practices, will kill corporations, which then turns the masses under the corporations bankrupt at the very end of the day because they've all depended on corporations, which means it's now the burden of the government to try to salot these, let's say for example, people at the very end of the day, which is now worse for everyone. How do we weigh better? Impacts are better absent the trend, but the people are also better absent the trend because we don't relegate the problem of climate and we don't relegate the problem of social and environmental impacts towards greedy and nasty corporations. This in and of itself is a principle opposition can never stand on. Propose.